Biblical flourishing happens when people in every sphere and every part of a society are loved and able to serve and contribute. We are called to influence a culture so it's flourishing as Christians. And to do that, we need to engage every sphere of society, from academia to what Travis was just sharing about, to every part of society. And our next speaker, Lisa Welter, is a friend. She's an inspiration on how to bring about that love and service and enable those who are vulnerable to be able to contribute. She has done this in an area that is often forgotten and missed when we talk about flourishing. We often miss those who are marginalized, poor, the children. And Lisa has been able to bring hope and encouragement and love to that spectrum. And she has done so by engaging different areas, from serving at Eagle Brook Church, working with 2,300 individuals involved there, or 23,000, to testifying before the Minnesota State Legislative, to working with myself and some fellow North Minneapolis pastors with Hennepin County Social Services, to starting a nonprofit, Connected Kids Initiative, to now serving with Safe Families. So it's my joy and pleasure to introduce my friend, Lisa Welter, as the next speaker.
A few years ago, I headed out to an area juvenile correction facility to deliver donuts and hot chocolate to kids and staff over Easter. Now, I was a pastor at that time, hoping to remind them that their lives mattered. As I placed the donuts down on the table, I noticed a teenage girl hanging out in the common space alone. I leaned over to the staff and I asked about her, learning that she was a foster kid who had been living in juvie for 9 months because there weren't enough foster homes. As I walked back to my car, I was really upset about this information. Here, I had been delivering donuts, and she was deeply broken. And I had walked away with the greatest message of all, having never spoken to her. It was a wake-up call. Like God had unveiled to me a problem that I simply did not understand, and I misunderstood for years. You see, I had been engaging with an overwhelmed child welfare system, and my solution was donuts. She had experienced such deep brokenness, and my temporary relief efforts were not bringing change to her at all. But as I thought about it a little bit more, every single outreach strategy I led as a pastor had the same process and outcome, primarily product-based. My thinking was deeply broken. Do a gut check with me right now. Think about your current outreach strategies at your local church. Are you seeing significant change in your zip code based on your efforts? Or how are you distinguishedly different from the Boy Scouts? Or are you finding you might be, like me, busy addressing social problems with food drives, backpack drives, and donuts? You see, at that point, I had become so frustrated at the lack of progress based on my own leadership efforts, while the problems in the community went up, not down. It was almost like an untreated social infection. Now, as I scanned the community for ideas, I started to notice a few things. I noticed that the churches in the area were pretty much doing the same thing I was doing, which actually made me feel better about myself. But the community did not view the church any differently than the area Boy Scouts club or civic group for that matter. But what was most discouraging is that the church had surrendered to this type of thinking, as if this was the best we had to offer. Colossians 1 says that Christ came to reconcile all things, and that's what I wanted for my community. But first, Christ had to reconcile my thinking. I was convinced that the church did have an antibiotic to address these social problems if we were willing to take a step back and consider what we had to offer. Now, one of the biggest social problems in America is this overwhelmed, under-supported child welfare system. And child welfare is incredibly complex, but most of us can relate to it with foster care, adoption, youth homelessness, trafficking, and the local child protection office. This is the vulnerable that the Bible asks us to care for, and we, the church, actually have 3 very potent antibiotics that can quite literally overturn child welfare if we wanted to change. Now, we do need other entities like local government and expert nonprofits, but the church is the carrier of one of the most significant antibiotics that can quite literally change America. Our mission is to reach people for Christ, and that primarily happens through a relationship, right? Not a product. And we all have a mandate to care for the poor. It's actually within God's original design for the local church to carry out all 3 of these mandates within the bounds of everyday life. Did you know that? We're the ones who have confused and made this really hard on ourselves. We do have to take a step back, though, and think about how God has uniquely equipped the church to carry out these 3 antibiotics. Now, all 3 of these antibiotics are actually relational environments that contain the gospel. All 3 work together. You cannot do one and expect a ton of change. So the 3 go together. These 3 antibiotics are our homes, our groups, and our business networks. And that is it. The first antibiotic that the church can offer to bring healing to child welfare is to share our homes with vulnerable kids. A few nights ago, I received a phone call from a local hospital with a single mom who was in crisis needing emergency surgery. She happened to have brought her 6-year-old with her, and the hospital was at its wit's end looking for a home for this child to go. Nearby family and friends did not exist, and their next call was to place this child in protective custody. About 9 o'clock that night, I came rolling back into my driveway with little Mackenzie in the back seat of my car. As I helped her unbuckle from her chair, she grabbed my hand as we walked to the front door. As I opened the door, my 2 teenage girls were excitedly waiting for her arrival. You see, while I was picking up Mackenzie, they were busy transforming their bedroom into a magical slumberland filled with cuddly blankets, soft pillows, and their cherished stuffed animals pulled down from the closet. Guys, these are my teenagers who usually have their faces glued to a screen and offer a grunt when I arrive. But at the news of a scared little one arriving from the hospital, my family transformed into a magnificent expression of God's love. Our families are one of the greatest change agents that can affect our world and our neighborhoods. And the church is loaded with families, right? Our homes are where faith is practiced, formed, and lived out. Today, in Minnesota, did you know that we have 6,000 homeless youth every single night? We have well over 13,000 kids in foster care. And we have 1,765 orphans. Yes, orphans. And we have thousands, if not tens of thousands, on the brink of entering child protection, just like Mackenzie. But I have very good news. We have 4,000 churches in this state. And with about 100 people per church, we are talking about a lot of potential homes that can quite literally erase this problem for us. If the church was willing to share its homes with vulnerable kids, we would bring significant healing to their lives by extending our family and personal relationships. The second antibiotic that the church can offer to bring healing to child welfare is to share our groups of people with those opening their homes to vulnerable kids. You see, when people say yes to caring for kids, it is usually not a planned experience. That was the case with Mackenzie. She arrived at a moment's notice. She was scared and confused. Now, we all had school and work the next day, and she had no clothing. I needed a car seat, and I had just lost the few precious hours needed to prep and plan for the next day's meals and to run errands. A few good neighbors and a small group to pitch in was the answer in a moment's notice. Our churches are loaded with groups of people, right? Think about your church. You can't even count the number of groups of people that you have. We have an abundance of Sunday school classes, men's softball leagues, youth groups, Bible studies, men's or women's knitting clubs, and they're all looking for ways to engage in their community. When your congregation shares its homes with vulnerable kids, you have a built-in support system called your groups of people that can quite literally wrap around these families and share what God has given them. Think about what happens when one family says yes, and the volume of people that are ignited into action to do the mission, care for the vulnerable together, and be a good neighbor. It just makes sense. It's how God equipped the church to carry out this mandate. The church is the answer. And if we shared our homes and our groups, we would see significant change in child welfare. The third, and probably most potent antibiotic the church can offer to those connected to child welfare is to share our business networks to promote independent living. Now, Mackenzie's mom had been in a terrible health predicament that week, but her isolation actually went a whole lot further. You see, Mackenzie's mom had been raised in foster care herself, and she no longer had a relationship with Mackenzie's dad. She did have a job at the local school, employed as an aide, but quickly became overwhelmed with the stress of life and single parenting. Having not seen parenting modeled well as a child, when she became overwhelmed, she took it out on Mackenzie. And unfortunately, Mackenzie had been in foster care twice. Because mom was considered unsafe for her daughter at times, she was also released from her job at the school. Mom wanted to work, but she had very few options. Mom did not see her value, the talents and contributions that she could make to remain independent. And mom needed a second chance. And she needed people in her life that would remind her of her value, dignity, and worth. And she needed access to business networks so that she could find a job that would match her skill sets. How many people in your church go to work Monday through Friday? All of us, right? When your church is opening its homes to vulnerable kids and your groups of people are wrapping around those homes, it is going to become extremely likely that you will bump into vulnerable families just like Mackenzie's. And what you can empower your business leaders to share what they have to offer, their friendship, their encouragement, and their business networks. Sharing our business networks with the vulnerable families is what helps them overcome major economic hurdles. And sharing our business networks will bring healing and justice to their lives. Friends, do you see how simple it is for the church to care for those connected to child welfare? It is so simple. We are the only ones in the community that carry this gospel message. Sharing our homes, our groups, and our business networks are game changers for the vulnerable, and it is what produces flourishing culture. Do you remember that girl in Juvie? How would her life look differently if she had churches in her community that understood their role? She would not live in a prison. She would have a warm, caring home. And she would have groups of people surrounding her and providing for all that she needed. And she and her parents would have access to economic opportunities that currently don't exist in her life. So you have a decision to make today. Will you consider doing something different? Will you change your outreach strategy and center it on what you were actually designed to do? If you say yes, I have already designed a toolkit for you. I will give it to you. It is so simple. but it's your call. Your community depends on your decision. You do carry the life-saving antibiotic that can quite literally overturn child welfare and change America. If you say yes, you will unlock the potential of the local church, the power of the gospel, as Christ reconciles all things to him. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lisa, for sharing. A few questions.